Hi guys, how are we doing? Just a quick one today where we'll be talking about the real risks for heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and how you can minimize your chance of all of those conditions. I'm Andy, I'm the clinical lead here at ReadyCare, and today I'll just be doing a quick 8, 9, 10-minute presentation on how to reduce your risk of all of those scary chronic diseases and what foods to choose or avoid in order to make that happen. Okay, so first of all, a little bit of background on us. We have, a couple of international awards, Clinical Pharmacy Congress Award, International Scholar Award for all that we do in terms of dietary protocol and reducing risk of cardiovascular disease. And I say that because some of the content I cover today may sound counterintuitive if you're new to the space. So at the root cause, and this is the key message, straight into it here, guys, no messing about. At the root cause of many, if not most, chronic diseases that kill us prematurely in the Western world is something called insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance, simply put, is prolonged high blood sugar levels from eating a lot of sugar and or carbohydrate, crossed over with a genetic proclivity for ending up with these chronic diseases. So high blood sugar levels are the main driver of chronic diseases. So we hear a lot of noise around, being sedentary, eating red meat, saturated fat, all these sort of things. But the absolute elephant in the room when it comes to chronic disease is that hyperinsulinemia, so high insulin levels, drives many chronic diseases. So we'll talk about which chronic diseases, and we'll also give you some practical implications or advice as to how you can eat to avoid these diseases. But one thing to understand, first of all, is insulin resistance is another way of saying high blood sugar levels. It's not quite, but that's the best way to think of it. So if you don't want to be insulin resistant and have very high insulin levels, which promotes all of these diseases and causes many of them, not just promotes them, then eat less sugar and carbohydrate. So high blood sugar levels go on to cause high insulin levels, which causes diabetes, weight around the midsection, problems with your cholesterol levels, referred to as dyslipidemia. Hypertension is high blood pressure. Neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, these are being referred to, many of them in the literature, as type 3 diabetes of the brain. Sleep apnea, PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, the leading cause of infertility in women of reproductive age, and many cancers. So particularly a lot of the hormone-positive cancers. There is a very, very clear, certainly correlative, potentially causative link between sugar in your body and manifestation of a myriad of different cancers, particularly hormone-positive cancers. And here's a stat that shocks a lot of people, but poor diet causes more disease and death than smoking, alcohol, and inactivity combined. So on the law of averages, and this is not always going to bear out, but broadly speaking, if you have a poor diet, but you are exercising and you don't smoke and you don't drink, you're at a higher risk of heart disease and cancer and Alzheimer's, dementia, all these things, than somebody who has a good diet and is smoking, drinking, and not doing any exercise. So diet is the number one lever that you would change in terms of reducing your risk of all of these chronic diseases. Now, if we look at remote tribes around the world who don't eat any processed food, so they have a really clean whole food diet, you see little or no chronic disease. And often when I do seminars, people will say they're kind of retort to that or come back to that will be, oh, well, they'd have way more cancer and heart disease and diabetes if they weren't hunting all the time. And actually, that's not true, because when we look at the literature, in populations that eat no processed food, that do no exercise, so let's call them sedentary, in this instance, Maasai, the Maasai tribe are just an African hunting tribe. When they do no exercise, and this is not for a period, I mean, they've got both their legs broken, their hips are destroyed, they're incapacitated, they have a head injury, they're staying at home taking care of kids, they're elderly, whatever it is. If we allow for exercise status, so if we look at the difference between people who do less than 1,000 steps a day and those who are doing 20,000, there's no real difference in terms of obesity and heart disease. So it is not the sedentary lifestyle, or it is not the exercising, lots of exercising and hunting that they're doing that's preventing them from getting chronic diseases. It would certainly help. It's not the main factor, because in parts of those remote tribes around the world who don't do any exercise for whatever reason, we see little or no obesity and cancer compared to in the Western world, where we eat lots of processed food. And again, if we look at this is the correlation between the obesity epidemic and the implementation of the low-fat guidelines. And as a scientist, which I am a researcher, I can't say that the low-fat guidelines caused the explosion in heart disease, cancer, ADHD, contributed to autism, dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. There's a genetic component to all of these, but I can't say that this was the trigger for a lot of these things manifesting. But it's a fairly clear correlation, and we also have a control group in that we have people in the remote tribes around the world who didn't get the memo that fat was suddenly bad for us after 2.4 million years and continued to eat an evolutionarily, ancestrally appropriate diet and never get heart disease, cancer, obesity, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome, erectile dysfunction. Those things don't really happen in parts of the world that don't eat loads of sugar and processed food. So it's a pretty cut and dry, and it goes far beyond this graph. I mean, there's a huge body of literature, metabolic health literature over the last 7 or 8 years that we can kind of put this to bed. The reason heart disease, obesity, many cancers, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, many of those what we call insulin resistance related conditions are exploding in the Western world where we eat loads of processed food and not in remote tribes around the world, has little or nothing to do with exercise or plastics or glyphosates. I mean, all of those things do contribute to heart disease and especially autoimmune conditions, hormonal disruption. The main cause of the explosion in chronic diseases that we see across the Western world is processed food. And by that, I mean refined carbohydrates, cereals, grains, overconsumption of breads, even things like granola bars, frozen pizzas, and industrial seed oils like these. If people only knew the chemical composition of rapeseed oil and those sort of canola oil and the stuff that people cook in 1 calorie spray, they're basically industrial lubricants. And the people who make them couldn't care less if you get sick or die from eating them, if I'm being totally honest. They're a company that stand to make money and will get away with whatever they can in order to better their bottom line. Okay, so this is how we currently treat these chronic diseases. The doctor doesn't, but should be saying to you, you have a diet caused by your diet. And you're kind of saying, well, should I change my diet? And the doctor's saying, not at all, here's your prescription. That's what's going on at the moment. We're not addressing the root cause. And in this analogy, this meme, we're talking about diabetes, pre-diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol issues, weight around the midsection, fatty liver, PCOS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. There's a genetic component to all of them, but your genes load the gun and your diet pulls the trigger. So getting back to this, we spoke at the start of the session about insulin being at the root cause. So if insulin is at the root cause, what do we know that will lower insulin levels? And we know that eating real food like meat, fish, eggs, cheese, none of which will increase your risk of cardiovascular disease like we used to believe, foolishly I would argue, for the last 30 or 40 years. Eating more of these and less of the processed, refined, cereal, grain-based food that we know spike your blood sugar levels. So if you want to know what sort of food should I eat, and I'll wrap it up on this, just a short one today, guys, just a 10-minute one. If you want to know, is there one key takeaway message for me to prevent heart disease, many cancers, diabetes, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome, sleep apnea, the list goes on and on and on. There is. When you're looking at a food, look at the carbohydrate content of it, not the fat, not the calories. Those things are borderline irrelevant in the large, grand picture of hormonal optimization and inflammation. So I would look at carbs, and it would say of which sugars, and that is a misnomer because all carbohydrate, with the exception of insoluble fiber, all of it turns to sugar in your bloodstream. So you might look at cornflakes and it would say 80 grams of carbs, of which sugar is 2. That's basically a nicely wrapped up lie because the 80 grams of carbohydrate convert to sugar, all of them, with the exception of the little bit of fiber that's in it. And that leaves you with 16 spoons of sugar in your blood. So whether you eat a bowl of porridge or a bowl of cornflakes, or whether you have a can and a half of Coke, the only thing that differs between the two is the speed at which the sugar ends up in your bloodstream. Ultimately, you've got the same amount of sugar into your bloodstream. If it's from a higher fiber source, does it buffer out at a slightly slower level? Yes. Does that make it much better for you? No, it doesn't. So I would say low carb is for sure one way that you can do as much as you can, that with exercise and sleep and managing stress, to prevent or at least minimize your chance of many chronic conditions. So bear that in mind going forward, guys. Thank you for listening to me this morning. I said I'd keep it short this morning. I was trying to keep it within 10 minutes, just going on feedback from some of our listeners. And yeah, have a good day, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.